Static cuts through my headset first, then screaming, then nothing at all. I am Elena Voss, commander of the escort ship Meridian, and the first thing I remember about that day is the silence that came after the noise. One moment the convoy channel was full of chatter, pilots joking about ration packs, engineers complaining about coolant leaks, a mother somewhere on the third transport singing to her child over an open comm line she forgot to close. The next moment there was only static, and then there was nothing, and the nothing was worse than any scream could have been. We were 3 days out from the edge of human space, escorting 11 transport ships loaded with settlers, machinery, and hope. The convoy was heading to Calder's Reach, a new colony world that had only been open to settlement for 2 years. Families were on those ships. Children were on those ships. I had walked the loading docks myself and watched a little boy chase his sister around a stack of crates while their parents argued about which crate held the good blankets. This route was supposed to be safe. Neutral space, according to the treaties. Nobody attacked convoys in neutral space, not according to the rules that every species in the coalition had agreed to follow for over a decade. Earth was new to these rules, newer than most, but we had learned them well. We believed in them. That belief is what makes what happened next so hard to explain, even now, even after everything. I was standing on the bridge of the Meridian when the first alarm sounded. It was not the alarm I expected. We trained constantly for pirate raids, for debris fields, for reactor failures. We did not train for what came out of the dark that day, because nobody believed it could happen there, in that stretch of space, under that treaty. Lieutenant Maya Okafor was at the sensor station, and I watched her face change before I heard her voice. She had a calm face, the kind of face that made junior officers feel safe during drills, and I had never seen it look the way it looked in that moment. "Commander," she said, "I have contacts, multiple contacts, bearing 270, closing fast. They were not there 30 seconds ago." "Cloaked approach?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Has to be. Nothing shows up that fast without cover." I ordered general quarters before I even had a clear picture of what we were facing. Some part of me, the part that had spent years training for exactly this kind of moment, knew that hesitation would cost lives even if the threat turned out to be nothing. Better to be wrong and ready than right and unprepared. I have thought about that decision many times since, wondering if faster action, even by seconds, could have saved more of the people who did not make it home. The convoy master, Captain Nathaniel Cole, called me on a direct channel. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tightness underneath it, the sound of a man doing his best to stay calm for the sake of everyone listening. "Meridian, this is Journey's End. We are reading the same contacts you are, requesting guidance. Hold formation," I told him. "Bring the transports into tight cluster pattern. Engines at full burn, away from the contacts. We will screen you." "Understood. Elena, be careful out there." He used my first name. We had known each other for 3 years, ever since I escorted his very first convoy as a green lieutenant, barely out of training. He had taught me more about convoy discipline than any instructor at the academy ever had. I told him I would see him on the other side of this, and I believed it when I said it. The contacts resolved on our screens a moment later, and my stomach dropped. There were 9 of them, sleek and dark, unlike any ship design registered with the Coalition database. Whoever they were not part of any treaty we knew. They were not bound by any rules we understood, and they were closing on the convoy at a speed that told me, with total certainty, that running was not an option. "Onboard AI is not returning a match," said my tactical officer, a quiet young man named Ravi Deshmukh, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. "These ships do not correspond to any known faction. Not the Dravith, not the Aloran trade fleets, nothing in our records." "Then we are looking at someone new," I said, "or someone who does not want to be recognized." I did not have time to consider which possibility frightened me more, because the unknown ships opened fire less than 10 seconds later. There was no hail, no demand, no warning shot across our bow the way the old stories always described first contact with hostile forces. There was only sudden, overwhelming violence, aimed directly at the heart of the convoy. The lead transport, a heavy cargo hauler called the Amber Dawn, took the first strike directly amidships. I watched the tactical display as her hull integrity dropped in a straight line toward zero, faster than any damage control team could hope to compensate. 240 settlers were registered aboard that ship. I did not know any of their names. I would spend the following weeks wishing I had asked. "Meridian, all batteries, return fire," I ordered, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Interpose between the transports and the contacts. Protect the convoy first. Protect ourselves second." We were 1 escort ship against 9 unknown attackers, and I knew even as I gave the order that the math did not favor us. But convoy duty carries a simple, absolute rule that every escort officer learns on their very first assignment. The ships you protect matter more than the ship you are standing on. I had sworn an oath to that principle, and in that moment, with the stars themselves seeming to hold their breath, I meant to honor it. The Meridian shuddered as our own weapons discharged, streaks of light crossing the black distance toward the enemy formation. I saw 2 of their ships take glancing hits, enough to make them break formation for a moment, but not enough to stop them. They regrouped with a speed and precision that told me these were not raiders acting on impulse. This was coordinated, this was practiced. Whoever they were, they had done this before, or they had trained extensively for exactly this kind of assault. Captain Cole's voice came through again, and this time the calm was gone. Meridian, we are taking heavy damage. Amber Dawn is gone. I say again, Amber Dawn is gone. I have lifeboats launching, but the enemy ships are not letting them clear the debris field. I looked at the display and felt something cold settle into my chest. The enemy was not simply attacking the transports. They were hunting the escape pods too. Small blips of light being erased one after another from our screens, like someone crossing names off a list. There was no strategic value in destroying lifeboats. There was no military logic in it at all. It was something else, something I did not have a word for yet, something that made my hands shake even as I kept giving orders in a voice that did not. Deshmukh. Redirect point defense to protect the lifeboats, I said. Priority 1, above even our own hull integrity. Commander, if we do that, we lose our shield coverage on the starboard side. I know. Do it anyway. He did not question me again. The Meridian turned, exposing our weaker flank to the enemy formation, and our point defense guns opened up on anything that came near the scattering lifeboats. For a few minutes it worked. I watched 3, then 4, then 5 small craft slip away from the chaos, engines flaring as they fled toward the relative safety of open space. Then something hit us. I do not remember the sound as much as I remember the floor disappearing from under me, the world tilting sideways, red emergency lighting washing over a bridge suddenly full of smoke and shouting. When I pulled myself back to my station, half the display was dark, and Maya was pressing a hand against a cut above her eyebrow, blood running down into her collar, still calling out contact positions like nothing had happened at all. Hull breach decks 4 through 6, came the damage control report. We are venting atmosphere. Emergency bulkheads sealing now. Casualties? Unknown. Commander, we have people trapped. I wanted to go to them myself. Every instinct told me to leave the bridge and pull my crew out of the wreckage with my own hands. But a commander who abandons the bridge in the middle of an engagement abandons every soul still depending on that bridge to make the right call. And so I stayed, watching the tactical display, watching more lifeboats vanish, watching Captain Cole's transport take a second hit that silenced his channel entirely. Journey's End is not responding, Maya said quietly. I did not answer her. I could not. I kept my eyes on the screen and my hands on the console, and I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was keep fighting, keep screening, keep trying to buy time for anyone still out there who had a chance of surviving. It felt like it lasted for hours. In truth, the official record would later show that the entire engagement took 11 minutes from first contact to the moment the attacking ships broke off and vanished back into whatever cloaking technology had brought them there. 11 minutes. I have relived those 11 minutes more times than I can count, and every time, they still feel endless. When the enemy ships finally disengaged, they did not retreat in the way I expected. They did not flee from a fight they were losing, because they were not losing. They left because they had already accomplished whatever they came to do. They simply turned, in perfect formation, and slid back into the dark as though the convoy had never mattered to them at all. As though 11 ships full of settlers and children and people singing softly to their babies had been nothing more than a brief distraction on their way somewhere else. The silence after they left was the worst part. No enemy fire, no engine roar, no voices on the comm channels except the ragged breathing of my own bridge crew and the crackle of failing systems throughout the ship. I looked at the tactical display and made myself count. 11 transports had entered that stretch of space. I could find confirmed wreckage signatures for 9 of them. Of the other 2, one drifted dark and silent, hull breached but somehow intact, and the last had vanished from our sensors entirely, its fate unknown. Casualty estimate, I said, and my voice cracked on the second word. Ravi did not look up from his console. Working on it, Commander. Early numbers are. They are not good. I gave the order to begin search and rescue operations before he finished the sentence, because I could not sit with the silence that would have followed if I let him finish. We spent the next 6 hours pulling survivors from wreckage and drifting lifeboats, wrapping the injured in thermal blankets, recording names for people who could no longer speak their own. I helped carry a boy no older than 7 off a damaged lifeboat myself, his arm broken, his eyes wide and empty in a way that no child's eyes should ever look. I did not know his name. I did not ask. I simply held him steady until the medical team could take him, and then I went back out to find more. By the time the last confirmed survivor was aboard the Meridian, we had lost contact with over 1,100 souls. I did not know that number yet, not the full weight of it, not standing there on the ravaged bridge with smoke still curling from a dead console and my own hands shaking too badly to hold a datapad steady. I only knew that Captain Nathaniel Cole, a man who had taught me everything I knew about convoy discipline, a man who had called me by my first name less than an hour before, was gone, along with everyone aboard Journey's End. I sat in my command chair as the Meridian limped toward the nearest relay station, and I stared at the wreckage field on the main display. Thousands of small debris signatures scattered across the black like broken promises. I thought about the little boy chasing his sister around the crates. I thought about the mother singing softly to her child on an open channel. I thought about 11 ships that had followed every rule, respected every treaty, trusted every assurance we had been given about the safety of that stretch of space. Somewhere out there, an enemy fleet had broken every one of those rules without a single word of warning, and I understood, sitting in that chair with blood on my sleeve and grief settling into my chest like a stone, that nothing about the peace we had believed in would ever look the same again. I did not yet know how right I was, or how far the consequences of that day would reach, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the vacuum outside our hull, that this was only the beginning. I keyed the long-range transmitter myself, my hands finally steady enough to type, and sent the full report back to Earth Command with a priority flag I had never used before in my career. Then I closed my eyes for just a moment, allowing myself exactly one breath of grief before duty demanded I open them again, and I waited to hear what my homeworld would say in response to what had been done to its people in the dark. I did not expect the answer that was coming. Nobody did. The return journey to the relay station took 4 days, and every one of those days felt longer than the 11 minutes of the attack itself. I spent most of the first day in the medical bay, not because I was badly injured, but because I could not make myself leave the survivors we had pulled from the wreckage. There were 63 of them in total, gathered from 2 lifeboats and 1 transport that had somehow held together despite catastrophic damage. 63, out of more than 1,100 who had begun that journey with hope in their hearts and a new world waiting at the end of it. A woman named Priya Anand sat near the back of the medical bay, cradling a bandaged hand and staring at nothing. She had been aboard the Amber Dawn, the first ship struck, and she told me later, in a voice stripped of all emotion, that she had been in a maintenance corridor checking on cargo restraints when the hull tore open 3 meters from where she stood. She did not remember reaching the escape pod. She only remembered waking up in it, alone, drifting, watching the debris field through a cracked viewport until our recovery teams found her. I sat with her for 20 minutes, saying very little, because there was very little that could be said. She did not want comfort. She wanted answers, and I had none to give her. All I could offer was my presence, and the promise that I would find out who had done this, and why. It was a promise I intended to keep, though I did not yet know how heavy that promise would become. The engineering reports that came in over those 4 days painted a grim picture of the Meridian herself. We had taken damage across 6 separate systems. Our starboard shield generator was completely destroyed, and 2 of our 4 engines were running at reduced capacity. Chief Engineer Dmitry Volkov gave me the full assessment on the second day, standing in my ready room with grease still staining his hands and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "We can make it to the relay station," he said, "but barely. I would not want to fly this ship into another engagement without at least 2 weeks of repair time." "Understood," I said. "Do what you can with what we have." "Commander, if I may ask, do you think they are coming back?" I did not have an honest answer that would not frighten him further, so I gave him the only answer I could offer with any confidence. "I do not know, but we will be ready either way." He nodded and left without another word, and I sat alone in my ready room for a long time afterward, staring at the report on my screen without really reading it. My mind kept drifting back to the attack itself, replaying it from every angle I could remember, searching for some detail I might have missed, some warning sign that could have changed the outcome. I found nothing. The attack had come from nowhere, executed with a precision that suggested extensive planning, and vanished just as quickly, leaving almost no trace behind except the wreckage and the grief. On the 3rd day, I finally sat down to write the personal messages I had been avoiding. Captain Cole had a sister on one of the outer colonies, and Coalition protocol required that a commanding officer who witnessed a colleague's loss send a personal account to the next of kin, separate from the official casualty notification. I wrote and rewrote that message more times than I could count, trying to find words that could honor a man who had shaped my entire career without making his death sound like nothing more than a bureaucratic entry in a report. In the end, I told her the truth. I told her that her brother had stayed calm until the very last transmission I received from him, that his final concern had been for the safety of the people in his care, and that he had died the way he lived, thinking of others before himself. I do not know if it brought her any comfort. I hope it did. By the time the Meridian limped into range of the relay station on the 4th day, I had composed myself enough to present a clear and professional account to Earth Command. I expected outrage. I expected an immediate summons to explain every detail, followed by weeks of diplomatic maneuvering as our ambassadors demanded answers from every faction in the region, insisting on formal inquiries through the Coalition Council, the slow grinding machinery of interstellar law that I had watched in action many times before during smaller disputes between rival trade fleets. That is not what I received. The relay station commander, a weathered officer named Grace Whitfield who had transferred to fleet administration after decades of frontline service, met me personally when the Meridian docked. Her expression told me nothing, which in itself told me a great deal. Officers who have nothing to hide rarely guard their faces so carefully. "Commander Voss," she said, "Earth Command wants your full report, in person, transmitted through secure channel the moment your crew is settled. Priority beyond anything I have seen in my career." "Understood," I said. "And what kind of response are we expecting? A formal protest to the Coalition Council?" Whitfield's expression flickered, just for a moment, something close to unease crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "I am not authorized to discuss the response, Commander. That will come from higher up. But I will say this. Whatever you saw out there, it has people scared, and people who are scared do not always follow the usual playbook." Her words stayed with me as I made my way to the secure communications room, my crew dispersing to quarters and medical care around me, while I prepared to relive the worst 11 minutes of my life for an audience I could not yet see. I thought I understood what fear looked like in the halls of command. I thought I had seen every version of caution and hesitation that came from officials weighing consequences before acting. I had no idea how wrong I was. The transmission connected, and I found myself looking at a conference room full of faces I recognized from briefing rooms and academy lectures, senior officers whose names carried weight throughout the entire fleet. At the center sat Admiral Whitfield's superior, a stern woman named Admiral Constance Farrow, whose reputation for careful, measured decision-making had made her one of the most respected voices in Earth Command for over a decade. I gave my report in full, holding nothing back, describing the unknown ships, the merciless precision of the attack, the hunting of the lifeboats, the final silence after the enemy withdrew. I described Captain Cole's last transmission, the little boy I had carried off the lifeboat, the 63 survivors out of more than 1,100 souls who had trusted the safety of that route. My voice remained steady throughout, though it cost me everything I had to keep it that way. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Admiral Farrow studied me through the screen with an expression I could not quite read, something between grief and grim resolve. "Commander Voss," she said finally, "thank you for your report, and for your conduct during the engagement. You protected 63 lives that would otherwise have been lost, and you brought your ship home. That is more than many could have managed. Admiral, may I ask what our diplomatic response will be? The families of the deceased will want to know that action is being taken." Farrow exchanged a glance with the officer seated beside her, and something passed between them that I recognized, even through the flat distance of a video feed, as the weight of a decision already made. "Commander," she said, "there will be no diplomatic response." I felt my stomach twist. "Admiral, I do not understand." "There will be no formal protest," she continued. "No petition to the Coalition Council, no request for arbitration. Earth is not appealing to anyone for justice in this matter." For a moment I thought she meant we intended to simply absorb the loss, to accept the deaths of 1,100 people as the tragic cost of exploring dangerous space, the way old naval powers on Earth had once quietly written off ships lost to storms or pirates, without demanding reckoning from anyone. The thought made me furious, in a way I struggled to keep off my face. Then Farrow spoke again, and her next words changed everything I understood about the world I had woken up in that morning. "As of 6 hours ago," she said, "Earth Command, acting under emergency wartime authority granted by the Unified Assembly, has declared a state of war against the responsible party. Strike fleets are already in motion. This is not a request for information, Commander Voss. This is notification of an active military campaign that began before you finished transmitting your report. I stared at the screen, certain I had misheard her. Declared war? Admiral, we do not even know who attacked us. We have no confirmed identification of the enemy faction. We do now, she said quietly. Intelligence has been tracking unusual fleet movements for the past several weeks. Movements we did not yet understand. Your attack, along with 2 smaller incidents we had not yet made public, gave us the final confirmation we needed. The attacking force belongs to a faction operating outside all known coalition boundaries, one that has apparently been testing our defenses and our resolve. They believed we would respond the way every other species in this region responds to sudden aggression, through committees, through inquiries, through months of careful, plotting diplomacy while they continued preparing for something larger. And instead, Admiral Farrow's eyes hardened, and for the first time since the transmission began, I saw something behind her calm professionalism that looked almost like fierce, controlled anger. Instead, Commander, Earth has done something none of our allies expected, and something our enemies clearly did not plan for. We skipped the part where we asked permission to defend our people. The room around me seemed to tilt, not from any physical shift but from the sheer scale of what I was being told. No warning had been given to the aggressors. No warning had been given to our own coalition allies, some of whom would surely see this as reckless, even dangerous. Earth had simply acted, mobilizing an entire war footing in the space of hours rather than the weeks or months that interstellar protocol demanded. I thought of Captain Cole's steady voice on that final transmission. I thought of the boy with the broken arm and the empty eyes. I thought of Priya Anand staring at nothing in the medical bay, waiting for answers that diplomacy would likely never have given her. And despite every instinct trained into me by years of careful protocol and diplomatic caution, some quiet and unexpected part of me felt something close to relief. Commander Voss, Admiral Farrow said, drawing my attention back to the screen, the Meridian will undergo priority repairs, and you will be reassigned within the week. We need experienced officers who have already faced this enemy directly. I want you ready to deploy the moment your ship is cleared. Yes, Admiral, I said, and I meant it with everything I had left. One more thing, she added, her voice softening just slightly, the first hint of the person beneath the uniform showing through. I am sorry for what you and your crew endured out there. I am sorry for everyone we lost, but I promise you this. Whoever did this to that convoy is about to learn exactly what kind of species they decided to test. The transmission ended, and I sat alone in the secure communications room for a long time afterward, staring at the blank screen, trying to absorb the fact that the galaxy I had known that morning no longer existed. Earth was at war, a war declared without warning, without permission, without the slow diplomatic machinery that every other power in the region relied upon. I did not yet know how our allies would react, or how our enemies would respond to a species that had apparently decided the old rules no longer applied. I only knew that somewhere out among the stars, a strike fleet was already moving, carrying Earth's answer to the wreckage of Journey's End and the Amber Dawn, and 9 other ships full of people who had simply wanted to build a new life on a new world. I closed my eyes and thought of the little boy from the lifeboat one more time, and I made myself a private promise that had nothing to do with orders or protocol. Whatever came next, I intended to be part of it. Word of Earth's declaration spread through the relay station faster than any official channel could contain it, and by the time I made my way to the officers' mess that evening, the entire station felt like a held breath waiting to be released. I sat alone at first, still processing everything Admiral Farrow had told me, until Maya Okafor found me, and sat down across the table without asking permission, her bandaged eyebrow now covered with a neat medical patch. You heard, I said. It was not a question. Everyone has heard, she said. Commander, is it true? We declared war before even telling the Coalition Council? That is what I was told. Maya shook her head slowly, not in disagreement but in something closer to disbelief, mixed with a strange, cautious hope. My grandmother used to tell me stories about old Earth, before the Coalition, before any of this. She said humanity used to be slow to anger but impossible to stop once provoked. I always thought that was just something old people said to sound wise. Maybe it was true after all, I said. Do you think it was the right call, skipping every formal process? I thought about the question carefully before answering, because it deserved a careful answer. I think, I said slowly, that every rule we followed assumed the people we were dealing with would follow rules too. Whoever attacked that convoy did not send a formal declaration. They did not request arbitration. They came out of the dark and they killed children, and they hunted lifeboats for no reason I can explain. I do not know if skipping the rules was right in some larger sense, but I understand why it happened. Maya was quiet for a moment, turning her cup slowly on the table. "My cousin was supposed to be on that convoy," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She switched to a later transport at the last minute, because of a work assignment. I have not been able to reach her yet to confirm she is safe." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. An unusual gesture for me, but the moment called for it. "We will find out," I said. "And Maya, for what it's worth, I am glad you were on my bridge today. I do not think I could have held things together without you." She managed a small, tired smile, and for a moment, the enormous weight pressing down on both of us eased just slightly. Two people finding a small piece of solid ground amid an ocean of uncertainty. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked the corridors of the relay station and found myself standing before a large viewport that looked out toward the dark stretch of space where the convoy had died. I could not see the wreckage from here, of course, the distance was far too great, but I found myself staring in that direction anyway, as though some part of me needed to keep watch over the place where so many lives had ended. A young ensign I did not recognize stood nearby, also staring out into the dark, and after a moment he spoke without turning to look at me. "Do you think it's really war now, ma'am? Real war, like in the old history files?" I considered the question for a long moment before answering honestly. "I think," I said, "that war has already come to us, whether we wanted it or not. The only question now is what kind of people we choose to be while we fight it." He nodded slowly, and we stood together in silence for a while longer, two small figures watching the endless dark, waiting to see what the coming days would bring. Somewhere out beyond that viewport, an entire fleet was already moving, carrying with it the full weight of a species that had just discovered exactly how far it was willing to go when pushed too far. I did not know it yet, standing there in the quiet hours after the worst day of my life, but the war that began that night would reshape everything I understood about my own people, about the fragile alliances holding the coalition together, and about the terrible, necessary cost of drawing a line that could never be uncrossed again. I only knew that I intended to be there when it happened, standing wherever Earth needed me, carrying the memory of Captain Cole and the little boy from the lifeboat, and everyone else who never made it home. The war had begun, and for the first time since the attack, I understood that Earth had no intention of losing it. I spent the following 2 days aboard the relay station while the Meridian underwent emergency repairs, and in that time I began to understand just how deeply Earth's decision had shaken the wider coalition. Every alien liaison stationed at the relay hub seemed to be moving faster than usual, their communications more frequent, their meetings held behind closed doors that had previously stayed open for routine business. I caught fragments of conversation in hallways and mess halls, translated through universal comm badges, and every fragment carried the same undertone of disbelief. A Vesh diplomat named Eth Sol approached me on the second day, finding me in the observation lounge where I had taken to spending my quiet hours. The Vesh were long-standing allies of Earth, graceful, patient beings who valued careful deliberation above almost everything else in their culture. Eth's pale blue skin seemed almost translucent under the lounge lighting, and the elder diplomat studied me with an expression I had come to recognize over years of working alongside Vesh officials, one that mixed genuine curiosity with quiet unease. "Commander Voss," Eth said, settling into the seat across from me with the unhurried grace typical of the species. "I wonder if you might help me understand something that has troubled my delegation greatly these past 2 days." "I will try," I said. "Your people declared a state of war within hours of an attack. Among my people, such a declaration would require no less than 40 days of council deliberation, consultation with allied factions, and formal notice delivered through proper diplomatic channels. Even in cases of grave provocation, the process cannot be rushed without risking terrible consequences. Yet Earth acted in less time than it takes my government to schedule a preliminary hearing. I do not say this as criticism, Commander. I say this because I am trying to understand a species I thought I knew." I considered my answer carefully, aware that whatever I said would likely be relayed back to the highest levels of Vesh government. "I think," I said slowly, "that my people have a long history of believing that swift, decisive action saves more lives than careful deliberation, especially when the threat has already shown it will not wait for anyone's permission to strike again. We did not act quickly, because we do not value careful thought. We acted quickly because 1,100 people were already dead, and every hour of delay was an hour the enemy could use to prepare for their next attack." Eth was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the patient stillness that marked so much of their culture's communication style. "There is wisdom in that reasoning," the diplomat finally admitted, "though it is a wisdom that frightens as much as it reassures. My government has spent this evening debating whether to formally support Earth's campaign, or to distance ourselves until the outcome becomes clearer. Some among my colleagues fear that a species capable of moving this quickly toward war might move just as quickly against its own allies should circumstances ever turn in that direction. The words struck me harder than I expected. I had been so consumed by grief and fury over the convoy that I had not fully considered how our own allies might react to the speed of our response. "Ayeth," I said, "I cannot promise you that every decision my government makes going forward will be the right one. But I can tell you what I saw with my own eyes 3 days ago, and I can tell you that no government capable of grieving that deeply for 1,100 strangers is a government that treats war lightly." Ayeth studied me for a long moment, and something in the ancient eyes softened slightly. "Perhaps that is the answer my delegation needs to hear, Commander. Perhaps it is not the speed of your response that matters, but the reason behind it." I did not know, in that moment, whether I had said the right thing, or simply the thing I needed to believe. But the conversation stayed with me, a small thread of understanding between two very different peoples, even as the wider coalition struggled to decide what Earth's actions meant for the fragile balance of power that had held the region together for over a decade. That night, alone in my temporary quarters, I finally opened the historical archive I had been avoiding since Admiral Farrow's briefing. I wanted to understand where this decisiveness had come from, whether it was truly some ancient pattern buried deep in human nature, or something newborn entirely from the horror of what had happened to the convoy. What I found surprised me more than I expected. Earth's history was full of long periods of caution, decades and even centuries where careful diplomacy and patient negotiation had prevented countless conflicts from ever beginning. But scattered throughout that same history were moments, sudden and sharp, where patience gave way entirely to swift, overwhelming action once a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. I read about conflicts my ancestors had fought, campaigns launched within days of provocations that other nations, in other times, might have spent months debating. I began to understand that humanity had never truly been slow to anger, only slow to reach the point where anger became necessary. The line existed. It had simply taken something monstrous enough to find it. Reading those old accounts, I began to understand what Admiral Farrow had meant when she said Earth's response reflected who we truly were beneath centuries of careful coalition diplomacy. We had learned patience because patience served us well for a very long time. But patience had never been the whole of what we were, only the shape we had chosen to show the wider galaxy while that shape still served our interests. The convoy attack had broken that shape entirely, and what remained underneath was something older, harder, and far more dangerous than any of our coalition partners had ever imagined. I thought about the Skarn, the name coalition intelligence had finally attached to the faction responsible for the attack, a fragmented collection of raiding clans operating from unclaimed territory beyond the treaty boundaries. Reports suggested they had spent years testing the defenses of smaller, weaker factions before turning their attention toward Earth, likely believing that a species so devoted to diplomacy and careful process would respond to aggression with nothing more than strongly worded protests and lengthy council sessions. They had gambled that Earth's patience meant Earth's weakness. It was a gamble I intended to help prove catastrophically wrong. On the third day, my repaired ship cleared final inspection, and Chief Engineer Volkov reported the Meridian ready for active deployment, her shield generators restored, her engines running at full capacity once more. I stood on the bridge as my crew returned to their stations, watching Maya settle into her chair at the sensor console, watching Ravi run diagnostic checks with the same quiet focus he brought to everything, and I felt something shift inside me, grief slowly giving way to a grim and steady resolve. New orders arrived within the hour, transmitted directly from Fleet Command, with a priority classification I had rarely seen outside of major operations. The Meridian was being reassigned to the 3rd Strike Fleet, gathering at a staging point near the edge of contested space under the command of Admiral Grace Whitfield herself, who had apparently been promoted and reassigned to active combat leadership within days of the attack. I read the orders twice, absorbing the scale of what was being assembled. Dozens of ships, thousands of personnel, an entire campaign designed to strike deep into Skarn territory before the raiding clans had any chance to regroup or prepare fresh defenses. I gathered my bridge crew for a brief address before we departed the relay station, standing before them in the same spot where I had given so many routine briefings over the years, though nothing about this moment felt routine. "I know what we lost 3 days ago," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I know some of you lost friends, or nearly lost family members who switched transports at the last moment. I carried a boy off a lifeboat with a broken arm, and eyes that told me he had already seen more horror than any child should ever witness. We are not flying into this campaign for glory, or for conquest, or because someone in a command chair wanted a war. We are flying into this campaign because the people who did this need to understand, beyond any doubt, that Earth does not simply absorb this kind of loss and move on. Whatever comes next, I am proud to face it standing beside every one of you. Maya was the first to respond, rising from her station and offering a crisp salute that the rest of the bridge crew quickly echoed. Ready when you are, Commander. I nodded, feeling the weight of command settle more firmly onto my shoulders than it ever had before. Then let's go finish what they started. The Meridian undocked from the relay station an hour later, engines burning bright against the dark as we set course for the staging point, where the Third Strike Fleet was gathering. I stood on the bridge, watching the relay station shrink behind us on the display, and I thought of Ayeth Sol's careful, worried questions, of Admiral Pharaoh's grim promise, of Priya Anand's empty stare in the medical bay, and of every soul who had trusted that convoy route to carry them safely toward a new life. Somewhere ahead of us, an entire fleet was assembling, carrying the full weight of a species that had discovered, in the space of a single terrible day, exactly how far it was willing to go once the old rules no longer applied. I did not know what waited for us in Skarn territory, or how the wider coalition would ultimately judge Earth's choice to act first and explain later. I only knew that I intended to be there when the reckoning came, flying toward whatever waited in the dark with the memory of everyone we had lost carried steady in my heart. The staging point near the edge of contested space looked like nothing I had ever seen assembled in my career. Ships stretched across the display in every direction. Carriers and cruisers and support vessels gathered in numbers that made the Meridian feel small by comparison, all of them bearing the same fresh directive stamped into their orders. I had grown up believing Earth's fleet moved with careful restraint, always the last to escalate, always the first to propose negotiation. Watching that armada assemble in real time, engines glowing steady against the black, I understood that restraint had simply been a choice we made, not a limit on what we were capable of building when the choice changed. Admiral Grace Whitfield addressed the assembled fleet captains over a joint channel the evening before we crossed into contested space, her voice carrying the same weathered steadiness I remembered from our brief meeting at the relay station. "Every one of you has read the reports," she said. "You know what happened to that convoy, and you know what kind of enemy we are facing. I will not pretend this campaign carries no risk, but I want every captain in this fleet to understand something clearly before we cross that boundary. We are not going out there to punish an entire people for the actions of raiding clans. We are going out there to make certain those specific clans, and anyone else considering similar action against Earth, understand precisely what they invited when they attacked defenseless civilians without warning. Precision matters. Discipline matters. We fight this war better than they fought their attack, or we do not deserve to call ourselves better at all." Her words settled over me as I closed the channel, a reminder that the resolve driving this campaign was not blind rage, but something more deliberate and, I hoped, more just. I passed her words along to my own bridge crew, watching them nod with quiet determination, and then I turned my attention to the final preparations before we crossed into territory no Earth vessel had ever openly entered as part of a declared military campaign. We struck at dawn, according to the fleet's synchronized clock, though there was no true dawn in the black void where the Skarn raiding clans had established their forward staging base. Intelligence reports, gathered through methods Fleet Command did not fully explain to line officers like myself, had identified the location with remarkable precision, a cluster of asteroid fortifications and orbital platforms hidden within a dense debris field that had clearly been chosen for its natural concealment. I watched from the Meridian's bridge as the first wave of strike craft launched from our carriers, sleek fighters cutting through the dark toward targets that had, until 3 days earlier, believed themselves completely beyond Earth's reach or resolve. The Skarn defenses activated within seconds, point defense batteries lighting up across their fortified positions, but the response came too slow, too disorganized, exactly as Admiral Whitfield had predicted during our final briefing. They built these defenses to survive raids from smaller, less coordinated forces, she had told us. They did not build them to survive a coordinated fleet strike from a species with centuries of naval doctrine behind it. Speed and precision will win this engagement before their command structure even finishes processing what is happening. She was right. I watched the tactical display with something between awe and quiet grief as our forces methodically dismantled the Skarn staging base, strike craft targeting weapon platforms and command centers with surgical precision, while larger vessels held position to prevent any reinforcements from arriving unnoticed. There was no chaos in our assault, none of the merciless disorder that had marked the attack on the convoy. Every strike served a clear purpose. Every target was chosen to disable rather than annihilate wherever possible, though the fortified command center at the heart of the base offered no such option, and I watched it collapse under concentrated fire within the first 20 minutes of the engagement. "Commander," Maya said quietly, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts, Enemy communications are in complete disarray. They are broadcasting on multiple emergency channels, but nothing coordinated. I do not think they expected this. No, I said, watching the wreckage of what had once been a formidable staging base scattering slowly across the display. I do not think they did. The engagement lasted just under 2 hours, a fraction of the time such an assault might have taken against a well-prepared, fully coordinated defense. By the time Admiral Whitfield issued the withdrawal order, the Skarn staging base had been reduced to a debris field of its own, its capacity to launch further raids against Coalition shipping lanes effectively destroyed. Our own losses, while not insignificant, were remarkably light given the scale of the operation, a testament to the discipline and precision that had guided every stage of the assault. I felt no triumph watching that base burn. I felt something quieter and more complicated, a grim satisfaction tangled together with an awareness of exactly how much destructive power my own people had just demonstrated to the wider galaxy. We had not simply won an engagement, we had announced, in the clearest possible terms, that Earth's capacity for decisive violence had been badly underestimated by everyone who assumed our diplomatic patience reflected the full extent of our capabilities. That announcement did not go unnoticed. Within days, reports began filtering back through coalition channels, detailing reactions from allied governments across the region, and the picture that emerged was far more complicated than simple support or simple condemnation. Some factions, particularly smaller ones who had suffered their own losses to Skarn raiding activity over the years, expressed open gratitude, relieved that a power finally existed willing to strike back decisively against an enemy that had terrorized shipping lanes for far too long. Others, including several longtime coalition members, responded with open unease, questioning whether a species capable of mobilizing an entire war fleet within days of a single attack could truly be trusted as a stable, predictable partner in the wider alliance structure. I encountered that unease directly during a brief resupply stop at a joint coalition station 3 weeks into the campaign. The station commander, a methodical Dravith officer named Kalis Thorne who had worked alongside Earth forces for nearly a decade, requested a private meeting with me shortly after the Meridian docked, and I found him standing in his office with an expression I had never seen on a Dravith face before, something caught between respect and genuine apprehension. "Commander Voss," he said, "I have followed your campaign with great interest, and I confess I do not know entirely what to make of it. The efficiency your fleet displayed against the Skarn staging base exceeds anything my own analysts predicted possible from Earth forces. Frankly, it exceeds anything they predicted possible from any coalition member acting alone. Is that meant as a compliment, Commander Thorne, or a warning?" He considered the question with the careful deliberation typical of his species. "Perhaps both," he admitted. "My government has always valued Earth's contributions to the coalition, your diplomatic flexibility, your willingness to compromise on matters other factions consider non-negotiable. But this campaign has revealed a different aspect of your people, one that raises difficult questions. If Earth can mobilize this decisively against an external threat, what assurance do the rest of us have that Earth would not respond with similar speed and force against an internal coalition dispute, should circumstances ever turn in that direction?" I understood the fear behind his question, even if I did not fully share it. "Commander Thorne," I said, "I cannot speak for every decision my government will make in the future, but I can tell you that the speed of our response to the Convoy attack came from grief and necessity, not from some hidden appetite for conquest. We did not build this fleet to threaten our allies. We built it because 1,100 people died in 11 minutes, and we refused to let that happen again without consequence. I hope that remains true," he said quietly, "for the sake of everyone in this alliance, including your own people." I left that conversation with a heavier heart than I expected, understanding for the first time just how much Earth's swift, decisive response had reshaped not only our enemies' perception of us, but our allies as well. We had proven ourselves capable of protecting our people with terrifying efficiency. We had also revealed, to friend and foe alike, exactly how dangerous we could become if that efficiency were ever turned in the wrong direction. It was a truth that would follow Earth's reputation across the coalition for years to come, and I suspected, standing there in Kalis Thorne's carefully organized office, that managing this new perception would prove nearly as difficult as winning the war itself. 4 weeks into the campaign, Fleet Intelligence achieved something none of us had expected so soon. A small Skarn transport, attempting to flee the collapsing remnants of their forward staging network, was intercepted nearly intact by a patrol group operating under Admiral Whitfield's command. Among the survivors taken into custody was a mid-level Skarn coordinator named Vresk, someone with enough knowledge of clan planning to prove valuable during the interrogation process that followed under strict coalition protocols governing the treatment of captured combatants. I was present for portions of that process, not as an interrogator, but as an officer whose first-hand account of the convoy attack helped verify certain details Vresk provided. What emerged from those sessions painted a picture I had suspected but never confirmed, one that explained, at least in part, why the convoy had been targeted with such calculated brutality. Vresk spoke through a translation module in a flat, mechanical tone that stripped most emotion from the words, though the content itself carried plenty of weight without embellishment. The Skarn clans, it turned out, had spent years studying coalition member species, cataloging their diplomatic patterns, their response times to provocation, their willingness to escalate conflict versus their preference for negotiation. Earth had been identified, based on years of observed behavior within coalition council sessions, as a species deeply committed to process, patience, and careful deliberation, a species that valued diplomatic reputation highly enough to avoid rash military action, even under significant provocation. They believed we were slow, I said, sitting across the secure interrogation room from the translation module relaying Vresk's words, because we chose patience as our diplomatic strategy for over a decade. Correct, the translation confirmed, relaying Vresk's response. Clan leadership calculated that a strike against a civilian convoy would provoke outrage, formal protest, and lengthy council proceedings, consuming months before any meaningful response could be organized. This delay would provide sufficient time to relocate primary staging operations and begin planning a larger campaign against multiple coalition targets simultaneously. Your convoy was selected specifically because it offered high civilian casualties with minimal military risk, intended as both a resource disruption and a demonstration of clan capability to potential allies among other raiding factions. I felt something cold settle in my chest, listening to Captain Cole's death, and the deaths of 1,100 settlers described in such clinical, calculated terms, as though the convoy had been nothing more than a line item in a strategic planning document. And yet, beneath the horror of that revelation, I also felt the fierce, grim satisfaction of understanding exactly how badly that calculation had failed. They expected months, I said. They got days. This outcome was not anticipated, Vresk confirmed through the translator. And even through the flat mechanical tone, I thought I detected something that might have been the alien equivalent of genuine bewilderment. Clan leadership has revised all strategic assessments regarding Earth forces. Current recommendation among surviving clan structures is complete avoidance of further engagement with Earth military assets. I left that interrogation room carrying a strange, complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow. Vindication, because it confirmed everything Admiral Farrow had told me weeks earlier about the miscalculation that had led to this entire war. The assumption that Earth's diplomatic patience represented weakness rather than choice. Sorrow, because that miscalculation had cost 1,100 lives, and no amount of decisive military response could ever bring those lives back. I reported the full interrogation findings to Admiral Whitfield that evening, and she listened without interruption, her expression growing more grim with every detail I relayed. They saw us as an easy target, she said finally. A species too committed to its own reputation for restraint to ever respond with real force. It is not the first time an enemy has made that particular mistake, Commander, and history suggests it will not be the last. But I confess, hearing it confirmed so directly does not bring me the satisfaction I expected. No, I agreed. It does not. We proved them wrong, she continued, but proving them wrong required this campaign to exist at all, which means 1,100 people had to die first for anyone to learn the lesson. That is not a victory I intend to celebrate, even as I continue prosecuting this war as effectively as I know how. Her words stayed with me long after that conversation ended, a reminder that even the most decisive, most necessary military response could never fully balance the scale against the loss that had made it necessary in the first place. I thought of Priya Anand, still recovering at a medical facility back in Earth space, still waiting for answers that no amount of strategic clarity could ever fully provide. I thought of Captain Cole's sister, receiving my carefully written message somewhere on a distant colony world, carrying grief that would follow her for the rest of her life, regardless of how the war ultimately concluded. The campaign continued for another 6 weeks after Vresk's interrogation, though the character of the fighting shifted considerably, once fleet intelligence understood the full scope of the Skarn strategic miscalculation. Rather than hunting for scattered raiding clans across a wide and poorly mapped stretch of contested space, Admiral Whitfield's forces began targeting the specific staging networks and resource caches that Vresk's information revealed, dismantling the clan infrastructure with a precision that left surviving Skarn forces increasingly fractured and disorganized. I found myself reflecting often, during the quiet hours between engagements, on how strange it felt to be fighting a war shaped almost entirely by a single miscalculation. The Skarn clans had believed Earth would hesitate, would deliberate, would allow months to pass before mounting any meaningful response, and that belief had shaped every aspect of their strategy, from the initial attack through their subsequent troop deployments and staging decisions. Every single one of those decisions had assumed a version of Earth that no longer existed, if it had ever truly existed at all, and the gap between their assumption and our reality had become the deciding factor in nearly every engagement that followed. During a rare lull in operations, I received a message from Ayeth Sol, the Vesh diplomat I had spoken with weeks earlier at the relay station. The message was brief, formal in the careful style typical of Vesh communication, but it carried genuine warmth beneath the diplomatic phrasing. Commander Voss, the message read, my government has voted to formally support Earth's ongoing campaign, following extensive review of the intelligence your forces gathered regarding Skarn's strategic intentions. It appears the threat your people identified extended well beyond the initial convoy attack, and Vesh intelligence now believes several other coalition members would likely have faced similar assaults had Skarn planning proceeded unchallenged. I confess I remain uncertain what to make of Earth's capacity for swift, decisive action, but I no longer doubt the necessity of the response you provided. I hope, when this conflict concludes, we might speak again under less urgent circumstances. I read that message several times before setting it aside, feeling a small measure of relief settle into the exhaustion that had accumulated over weeks of continuous campaign operations. Not every ally would come to trust Earth's new reputation easily, and I suspected some, like Kalis Thorn, would carry lingering unease for years regardless of how this particular war concluded. But Ayeth's message suggested that understanding, however cautious and incomplete, remained possible even in the aftermath of a decision that had shocked the entire coalition. I carried that small comfort with me into the final weeks of the campaign, holding on to it during the long, difficult nights when grief for everyone we had lost threatened to outweigh whatever grim satisfaction our military successes provided. The war was not over, but for the first time since watching Journey's End vanish from my tactical display, I allowed myself to believe that something meaningful might eventually come from all of it, some fragile foundation for a different kind of future among the stars. In the 8th week of the campaign, the Meridian received brief orders back to Earth space for essential resupply and crew rest, a welcome reprieve after so many weeks of continuous operation deep in contested territory. I used the journey home to finally visit the medical facility, where Priya Anand and several other convoy survivors had been receiving long-term care, a visit I had promised myself I would make since the day we pulled her from the wreckage of the Amber Dawn. She looked different than I remembered, stronger somehow, though the haunted quality in her eyes had not entirely faded. She sat in a small garden courtyard attached to the medical facility, sunlight from an artificial sky filtering down through carefully maintained greenery, and she rose to greet me with a hand that had healed cleanly from the injury she carried when we first met. Commander Voss, she said, I did not expect you to remember me among everyone you must have helped that day. I remember all 63 of you, I said, and meant it completely. How are you healing? She considered the question carefully before answering, the same careful consideration I remembered from our first conversation in the medical bay all those weeks ago. Physically, well enough. The rest takes longer. I still hear the sound the hull made sometimes, when everything is quiet. I do not think that particular sound ever fully leaves a person. I sat down beside her, unsure exactly what comfort I could offer, beyond simple presence, the same limited gift I had given her during those first difficult hours aboard the Meridian. I wanted you to know, I said, that the people responsible for what happened to the Amber Dawn have paid a significant price for that attack. Their staging networks have been largely dismantled. Their capacity to threaten other convoys has been severely reduced. Priya was quiet for a long moment, watching the artificial sunlight play across the leaves of a small tree planted near the courtyard's center. Does it help? She asked finally, knowing that. Does punishing them make any of this easier to carry? It was a question I had asked myself many times over the preceding weeks, standing on the bridge of the Meridian while enemy positions burned on our tactical displays, and I gave her the most honest answer I had. Some days it helps a great deal. Other days it feels like it changes nothing at all, because nothing brings back the people we lost. I think both of those feelings can be true at the same time. She nodded slowly, as though this answer matched something she had already suspected but needed to hear confirmed by someone who had walked the same difficult path. I have been thinking about starting a small memorial garden here, she said, gesturing at the courtyard around us. Something with a marker for each of the ships we lost, and the names of everyone who did not come home. I do not know if it will help, but I think I need somewhere to put this grief besides just carrying it around inside me all the time. I would like to help with that, I said, if you would allow it. We spent the next hour discussing her plans in careful detail, and by the time I finally left the medical facility to return to my ship, I found myself carrying something I had not expected to find that day. A small, fragile sense of purpose beyond the war itself. A reminder that healing and remembrance mattered just as much as strategic victories and dismantled enemy staging networks. That evening, I received a personal message from Admiral Farrow, requesting my presence at a briefing regarding the campaign's next phase. I reported to the meeting expecting further orders regarding continued operations against remaining Skarn holdouts, but what I found instead surprised me considerably. Admiral Farrow's expression carried a weariness I had not seen during our first conversation weeks earlier, the exhaustion of someone who had spent months managing not just military operations, but the complicated diplomatic fallout that had followed Earth's unprecedented response to the Convoy attack. "Commander Voss," she said, "I want your assessment. You have fought this campaign from its very first hours, and you have spoken directly with Allied representatives concerned about the precedent our response has established. In your judgment, has the cost of this war, including the diplomatic cost within our own coalition, been worth what we have accomplished?" I considered the question with the same care I had given Priya's question earlier that day, understanding that my answer might carry weight in decisions made far above my own rank. "Admiral," I said, "I do not think any cost is ever fully worth 1,100 lives, but I believe the response we chose prevented a far greater cost from being paid by others." Vresk's testimony confirmed that other coalition members were likely targeted for similar attacks, had our response not disrupted Skarn planning as thoroughly as it did. I believe lives were saved by acting decisively, even if I cannot know precisely how many. And the fear our decisiveness has created among some of our allies, the uncertainty about what kind of partner Earth has become? I think, I said slowly, that fear is a burden we will need to manage carefully going forward, through consistency and restraint in how we use this capability in the future. We have shown the galaxy what we are capable of when truly provoked. Now we must show them, through years of measured conduct, that this capability will not be turned carelessly against friend or stranger alike. Admiral Farrow studied me for a long moment, and something in her expression suggested my answer had matched thoughts she had already been wrestling with on her own. "That will not be an easy balance to maintain, Commander. Some voices within the Assembly are already arguing that our new reputation gives us leverage we should use more aggressively in future disputes, diplomatic or otherwise. Others fear we have created exactly the kind of dangerous precedent our allies worry about, one that could isolate Earth from the coalition entirely if we are not careful." "Then I suppose," I said, "the next chapter of this story will be just as important as the war itself. Perhaps more important." Farrow nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had known her, something close to genuine warmth crossed her weathered features. "I believe you may be right, Commander, which is precisely why I am recommending you for a new assignment once current operations conclude. We need officers who understand both the necessity of decisive action and the responsibility that comes with wielding it. I think you have proven yourself capable of holding both of those truths at once, and that is a rarer quality than you might realize." I left that briefing carrying a complicated mixture of pride and apprehension, understanding that whatever came next would require me to navigate territory far more difficult than any battlefield I had yet faced. The delicate, uncertain work of helping Earth find its place in a galaxy that now viewed us through an entirely different lens than it had just months before. I thought of Priya's memorial garden, of Ayeth Sol's cautious message of support, of Kalis Thorne's lingering unease, and I understood that the true test of everything we had fought for was only just beginning. 3 months after the initial attack on the convoy, the Skarn clans that remained sent a formal request for terms through neutral coalition channels, a request that surprised almost everyone except Admiral Whitfield, who had predicted this exact outcome once enough of their staging infrastructure had been dismantled. Without the resources to continue meaningful resistance, and with surviving clan leadership apparently convinced that further engagement with Earth forces guaranteed only further losses, the remaining factions chose negotiation over annihilation, a choice that would have seemed unthinkable to them at the outset of this conflict. I was not present for the formal negotiations themselves. Those were handled by career diplomats far more skilled in that particular art than I would ever be, but I followed the proceedings closely from my post aboard the Meridian, still stationed near the boundary of what had once been contested space. The terms that eventually emerged were firm but not merciless, requiring the Skarn clans to withdraw entirely from any territory bordering coalition shipping routes, to submit to monitoring arrangements designed to prevent future raiding activity, and to provide full reparations, insofar as reparations could ever truly compensate for lives lost, to the families of everyone killed aboard the convoy. I thought often, during those final weeks of active operations, about what Admiral Farrow had said regarding the delicate balance Earth would need to maintain going forward. The temptation to press our advantage further, to demand harsher terms simply because we now possessed the capability to enforce them, was one I watched several voices within the Assembly argue for during those negotiations. But cooler heads ultimately prevailed, guided in part, I later learned, by testimony from officers like myself who had lived through both the horror of the initial attack and the sobering responsibility of wielding decisive force in its aftermath. The formal peace agreement was signed 6 months to the day after Journey's End and the Amber Dawn were destroyed, a ceremony held aboard a neutral coalition station with representatives from every major faction in attendance. I was invited to attend as one of the officers who had witnessed the conflict's beginning, and I stood near the back of the ceremonial hall, watching Admiral Farrow and Admiral Whitfield formalize terms alongside diplomats I recognized from months of following the war's diplomatic dimension from a distance. Ayeth Sol found me after the ceremony concluded, the Vesh diplomat's careful, patient expression carrying something that looked almost like genuine relief. "Commander Voss," Ayeth said, "I believe I owe you an update on the conversation we began at the relay station all those months ago. My government has concluded its extended review of Earth's conduct throughout this conflict, and the assessment, while not without lingering concerns, has proven largely favorable. Your forces demonstrated exactly the kind of restraint and precision I hoped for when I first raised my questions, even while wielding capability that continues to give many of my colleagues considerable pause." "I am glad to hear it," I said, and meant it deeply. "Though I suspect that pause you mentioned will not fade entirely, not for a long while yet." "No," Ayeth agreed. "I do not believe it will. But perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing, Commander. A galaxy that understands Earth's capabilities, and trusts that those capabilities remain guided by genuine restraint rather than unchecked aggression, may prove a more stable galaxy than one that mistook your patience for weakness, as the Skarn clan so tragically did." I thought about her words often in the weeks that followed, as the Meridian finally received orders to stand down from active combat status and return to more routine patrol duties. I thought about them while attending the dedication ceremony for Priya Anand's memorial garden, now completed with a small stone marker for every ship lost that day, each one engraved with names I had spent months learning by heart. I thought about them while writing a final message to Captain Cole's sister, informing her that the peace agreement included a formal acknowledgement of her brother's courage during the attack, a small but meaningful gesture toward the countless acts of quiet heroism that had occurred during those terrible 11 minutes. Standing in that memorial garden during its dedication, surrounded by survivors and family members of the deceased, by fleet officers and coalition diplomats, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed since the day I watched Journey's End vanish from my tactical display. Earth had entered this conflict as a species widely regarded, however respectfully, as diplomatically cautious to a fault, a young power still finding its place among older, more established coalition members. We emerged from it as something different entirely, a species whose patience was now understood not as weakness, but as a deliberate choice that could be set aside instantly and completely, once genuine provocation demanded it. Priya found me near the edge of the garden as the dedication ceremony wound down, the two of us standing together in comfortable silence for a while, before she finally spoke. "Do you think it worked?" she asked. "This whole idea that showing the galaxy what we are truly capable of will actually keep people safer going forward?" I considered the question with the same careful honesty I had tried to bring to every difficult conversation throughout this entire ordeal. "I think," I said, "that no single war or single peace agreement can guarantee permanent safety, not for us, not for anyone in this galaxy. But I believe fewer factions will look at an Earth convoy and see an easy target now, understanding that our patience carries a limit, and that limit, once crossed, brings consequences swift and thorough enough that few will risk testing it again." "That is not quite the same as safety," Priya observed. "No," I agreed, "it is not, but perhaps it is the closest thing to safety that any of us can honestly promise in a galaxy this large and this uncertain." She nodded slowly, accepting that answer with the same quiet resilience I had watched her build throughout the months since the attack, transforming from a survivor pulled trembling from a lifeboat into someone capable of building something meaningful from the wreckage of that terrible day. We stood together a while longer, watching the last of the ceremony attendees drift away through the garden's carefully tended paths, until only the memorial markers remained, silent and steady beneath the artificial sky. I returned to active duty the following week, resuming patrol operations along shipping routes that had once again grown busy with civilian traffic, families and settlers and traders moving freely through space that had briefly become a battlefield. I watched those convoys pass with a different kind of attentiveness now, no longer simply performing routine duty, but carrying with me the full weight of everything that duty actually meant, every life depending on decisions made in a heartbeat, every family trusting that the people sworn to protect them would do so with everything they had. Admiral Farrow's promised new assignment arrived several months later, transferring me to a small advisory role working alongside coalition diplomats to help other Earth officers navigate the complicated new landscape our decisive response had created. It was slower, more careful work than commanding a warship through active combat, but I came to understand its importance just as deeply, helping build the fragile trust that would determine whether Earth's new reputation ultimately strengthened the coalition or tore it apart through fear and misunderstanding. I think back often to that first terrible day, to the static that cut through my headset before the screaming started, to the silence that followed and proved so much worse than any sound could have been. I think about Captain Cole's steady voice on that final transmission, about the boy with the broken arm and eyes too old for his years, about Priya Anand staring at nothing in the medical bay before slowly, painfully, finding her way back toward purpose and healing. Earth declared war that day without warning, breaking every diplomatic custom the wider coalition had come to expect from us, and I understand now, with the clarity that only time and reflection can bring, exactly why that choice mattered as much as it did. We did not choose war because we craved conquest, or because we wished to frighten our allies into deference. We chose war because 1,100 people trusted us to keep them safe, and we failed them once, and we refused, with everything we had left, to fail anyone else the same way again. The galaxy learned something about Earth that day, something we ourselves had perhaps forgotten during years of careful, patient diplomacy. Beneath every treaty we honored, and every careful negotiation we pursued, there remained a line that could never be crossed without consequence, swift and absolute. I do not know what the coming years will bring, what new challenges Earth will face as it continues finding its place among the stars, but I know this much for certain, carried with me from that first terrible day through everything that followed. We will not be tested that way again lightly, and should the day ever come when someone forgets that lesson, they will find, as the Skarn clans did, that Earth's silence has never once meant surrender. It has only ever meant we were choosing, very carefully, exactly